Hey, we're live. I believe that we are live.
Hey, good people, welcome to your show tonight, Turning Pages. This is where we talk to the authors and poets before they hit the stages. I'm Nicole Blackson. Co-host is, and we have tonight the author, Sharice Singleton. We're going to be talking about the book, My Journey from Impossible to Manifestation. What's your first question, Lady K?
So, my journey from impossible to manifestation. Tell the people what's that all about.
So I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorder several times over the past probably like 15 years. And it's been a journey coming from a place where I was just stuck into getting to where I was even able to call myself even like living. And the book just basically details me going back to the things that I needed to in my past and, to reconcile things that I needed to. And it just discusses everything that I had to go through to get to the beginning in order for me to, start living victoriously.
Wow.
Yeah, so that word that you left off with victoriously, what's the difference between how you were living before the process of writing the book, the knowledge that you acquired into now?
So I think before I was not as self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the process, I became more self-aware of a lot of things that I had suppressed over many years. There were a lot of things that I was unaware of about myself, my likes, my dislikes. I speak about triggers, things that were triggering me, and then also just to be able to acknowledge the fact that I was being depressed. So I could not even get to that point before. And a part of me now being able to say that and to talk about it is a part of me living victorious. Because before it was a conversation that I could only share with a therapist, or if my doctor asked me, it was not something that I could speak about openly. So now it's something that I speak about, not just with my physician or with my therapist, but it's something that I speak about often just to help bring awareness to depression and anxiety and, a whole lot of other, I guess, labels that come along with it.
Yeah. So when you were talking about just being open, right, I was thinking about vulnerability. That word just kept popping up in my head. For you, it had to be a point where you saw vulnerability as one thing before you started this process, and now you see it as a completely different thing.
So vulnerable was a word that I heard a lot, but it was something that I considered with, I associated with being weak.
Yeah.
And if you were vulnerable, that means that you just left. I don't know if you kind of think of a bullseye, and the vulnerable part was that bullseye right there. And if I was vulnerable, then that let somebody right in and they could get to me. So vulnerable was not something that I liked to be. I felt very weak in that state. And now it has totally flipped to the opposite. Whereas now I can be vulnerable in sharing what I need to share to help strengthen somebody else. And before, I could not see the benefit of it. Yeah. I could not see me being vulnerable to help somebody else. Not because I did not want to help, but I did not see vulnerability as a strength. I always saw it as a weakness.
I like that when you said the bullseye analogy, because it's kind of like the center is open.
Right.
Like,
right.
So what strengths did you gain from writing the book?
Probably confidence in myself and confidence in the journey that I now have to go on. And that wasn't like that before. So I've had very low self-esteem since I was young, it's probably as far as I can remember. And it was something that I never thought I would be able to attain. I never thought that I would be confident in, even in knowing what a weakness was, or even in knowing something that I needed to work on. I would never see that as a strength. I would never see a certain area as me being able to be confident in. And now it's like, if I'm not okay, I can say I'm not okay. And if something is wrong, I can say it's wrong, but guess what? I'll be okay.
Right.
And it's not the same as it was before. Before it was, if I made a mistake, if something happened, I was just down and I was down and out. And it was not something that I just felt confident in. I didn't feel confident in my decision making. I didn't feel confident in struggles that I had. I didn't feel confident as a parent. I did not feel confident in my employment. It was just across the board. It was bad. It was bad.
Speaking of your employment, so you're in the helping profession,
Yes.
right? So you come from a
Yes.
social work background, as
Yes.
I do,
Yes.
right? So how was that? You're going into the job day in and day out.
Mhm.
You're working with clients, right? Servicing people that might be experiencing the same thing you're experiencing,
Mhm.
but you can't say it,
Mhm.
right? You can't show it.
Mhm.
How was that experience?
So I remember one day I was at a mental health conference. And we were, I believe it was somewhere down, I forget the location, but we were all sitting like in this big room, and it was kind of like I was sitting here and my coworkers were sitting like 2 rows in front of me, and they had this big screen and they had the definitions of just certain things. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking of how I could help my clients. I'm literally sitting here thinking of how I can help this person, how I can help that person. And as big as that screen was, never once did I say, that's me. And I remember when I was writing the book, I said it was a big screen. And I don't think you could get some, but that's how obvious it was that I would help somebody else, but I would never turn the light on so that I can do it for myself. And then slowly but surely, I began to associate what they were going through and what I was going through, but then I felt guilty. Like, who am I to tell you how to do this? And I'm struggling with the same thing. Like, who am I to say, okay, I know you're depressed because I'm depressed. You know what I mean? Like, I could not do that before. I couldn't say it. And I saw parents who struggled. I saw kids who struggled. I saw teens who struggled. And it was literally, sometimes it was looking in the mirror. I'm like, wow, I helped X, Y, and Z, but I still can't take the same thing and believe it, that the same tools and things would work for me. I didn't think that. I didn't think that it would be able to help. At some point, I got to one of the bottom parts. They say when you hit your bottom, is when I just thought that it was no help for me.
So when did that wow moment come? That surprise moment that's like the light bulb did go off. When did the light bulb actually go off, and how did it happen?
So, even though I did not feel confident in the job that I was doing, a lot of my clients, I didn't really have a problem with clients. Probably 85% of the time I did. But, but my depression affected my work.
Right.
So I was someone, like procrastination, organization, just things like that. It was very, very difficult, and I would get overwhelmed, and I had a problem with losing things. So at my job, I got I can't remember the form, but I got in trouble at work, and I got on this whatever form it was, basically saying if you screw up again, you're getting fired, basically. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna get this together. I'm gonna do it right. And I started doing things the right way. And something came up from before before the process or whatever was written. And when it came up, my director is still affected basically where I was. So they called me in the office, and I already knew like it wasn't good. And I said, am I getting fired? No, I said, am I about to lose my job? And she said, yes. How long were you working? A long time. A very, very long time. And I got up. I went to my desk. You get probably like a couple minutes to do stuff. And I was like, I don't even remember what I took. I probably just grabbed my pocketbook or whatever. And then I just left out. And I called my mom on the way home. And I told my mom what happened. and I went to my house. My mom only worked like 10 minutes from my job, and she met me there, and I lost it. I literally lost it. And I left. I was like, I gotta get out of the city. I could not be here in Philly. So I went, one of my girlfriends lived in Maryland. And I went down there, I got my daughter, my youngest daughter, Diane, we went down to stay with her in Maryland. My pastor called me, and it was probably about like maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. And she began to talk to me. And while she was talking to me, we tapped into the grief that I was experiencing with my grandmother. And from that conversation on, that helped me to tap into the grief that I had been experiencing over so much, but I had not realized how much I miss my grandma.
Yeah.
And she was like, my grandma was everything to me. So for me to lose her, I had not, I guess, processed it, and I thought I did, and I didn't realize just how bad it was affecting me. So when that happened, and I went down there, I stayed down here. I don't remember how long I stayed, but when I came back, that's when I started. That probably was one of the hardest things that I had to like start rebuilding my life after that.
What year was that?
Ugh. 2014? 15, 14, 15?
When did you finish writing the book?
What's this?
2019.
2000 and early 2019. Early 2019. So what happened? Can I explain that part now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
So because I knew one of the audience members, she had a question. So this kind of goes along with that. So I'm adopted parent, and I have 3 adopted girls. My oldest daughter, and my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter are my 2 older daughters are biological siblings. I adopted them at the same time. My youngest daughter, who's 10, she's not biologically related. So my book I started writing was on adoption, because as from working in the field, there are a lot of stories and horror stories, but there are also a lot of good stories. And so my idea for my book was writing about the different phases of adoption. Whether so Diamond I had since she was an infant, and my 2 older daughters I had when they were 8 and 11. So it's a difference when you get an older child. And I wanted to include probably about 5 or 6 families who all had different adoption stories to compile, because I wanted to help, because there's so many people who say, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I wish somebody would have told me this. So that's what I actually started writing. And in the midst of everything of writing that book, I journal a lot. And I would journal, I would write in my regular journals, but I would have notes in my phone. I would have notes like in a composition book. And all of this had to do with the depression. And I realized after a while, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not writing about the adoption as much as I'm writing about the depression. And after a while, it was like, this is the way that this is supposed to form. I'm supposed to write this book first. And what I did was one of my mentors, Monica Haskell, she had a birthing your book in 30 days class. So I took that. I was a little bit slow, and I didn't get mine done in 30 days. So I got a writing coach, and she's with OGW Publishing.
Okay.
And Odessa was like, she was the crack and the whip, like, and she took no mess. And I remember one time she got me on the phone, and she was like, da, 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 and she was like, no excuses. And like, she would always call me Cherie. She would always just like, Cherie, no excuses. And I'm like, you're right. She was like, Cherie, no excuses or whatever. So I started compiling everything. But the amazing thing is when I started taking things from my phone, from my journals, from all of the places that it was like a puzzle piece coming together.
Wow.
And as I put together the pieces of the puzzle, I saw how I was putting me back together.
Wow.
And I had never seen it like that before. And that amazed me. That really amazed me because it was like I had so many pieces that I didn't know. And only thing I literally had to do probably was like fill in some things
Mhm.
because there was a lot of gaps. But it was like the gaps that were present was stuff that was going on currently. So then I had to make the decision, is this supposed to be in here now? Or is this something that still has to do with what happened in the past? So I had to make those, which was hard decisions. And this is not even half of it. This is the beginning of what it took me to get here. But when I traveled back and start putting everything together, then that's how the book and came together. And then I just realized how I was growing, how I was maturing. So that was, I don't know, I hope I answered the question.
No, you did.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reading through the book, though, I mentioned your pastor earlier.
Mhm.
Reading through the book, there were a lot of biblical references.
Mhm.
So, what was the journey for your faith?
So when I was 18, I had went to college and I had met this pastor down there, and he was very he was such a nice man. He was such a nice pastor. And I had never heard Christianity explained the way he explained it. But I remember one time I was talking to him and he said something that kind of like it kind of like made me scared a little bit. And he said, you know, Jesus loves you more than your parents or something like that. I can't remember his exact words. And I was like, Like I had never heard that. Like you're talking about somebody who loved me more than my mom. Like, no, that's just not possible. So when I heard that, it like started giving me doubts in what it really was. So my grandma at the time was still living, and me and my grandma wrote all the time. So I would write her like, Grandma, this happened, and then she would write me back. You know, babe, you gotta have faith. Like she would write back all of the questions that I had. So little by little, my questions started getting answered, but I still had something that I was unsure about. And about 2 years later, I was up at University Park and I started having these nightmares. And I didn't know what the nightmares were about. But the nightmares would wake me up out of my sleep, and I would just like I would get up and I would scream, Mom. Sometimes if I could literally be sitting in a room full of people, and it's like if I would like zone out for a second, something would happen and it would take me back to that nightmare, and like my chest would start pounding. And this went on, and I told nobody.
How long?
Oh, no, don't look at me.
I'm
I'm
thinking, 'cause that's what I'm saying. She didn't even know. She because I didn't even know. These nightmares went on probably. They literally just stopped after I turned 40. So when I started going back,
Motion detected at your front door.
when I started going back and looking at fear and what I was fearful of, the nightmares kept coming up. And when the nightmares kept coming up and the fear kept coming up, I realized I had doubt in if God was really God. And that scared me because that was a part of me being Sheree. Like I'm a Christian, like I always believed in God. And it took me back to that pastor who introduced Christianity to me. And I had to go back to like really just like, what do I believe and why do I believe it? And that really shook me to my core.
Give me a word of what you believe God is. Or who you believe
Now?
God is. Yep.
Now, to me, God is really everything. Sorry. And the reason why I say that is because nobody else knew what I was going through. I've known Colette for years, and it's stuff that she didn't even know. I knew my girlfriend who from Maryland, she calls me 007. And I've known her for over,
I saw that in the book.
yeah, I know her for
What's
over
her
20 something
research?
years.
I went through the whole thing.
I
did my research.
did her research. So when it was times when I wanted to take my life, when it was times that I had so many questions, and I had to look back at what my grandmom said. I had to look back at who really rescued me, who really covered me. And I had to do that by myself. Like, I couldn't base that off of nothing that nobody else told me. And that was hard. That was really hard because at that point, when you're by yourself and you're going through it by yourself, it's real.
Yeah.
It's real because it's like now, if I believe in God and I believe that He is the creator of the heaven and the earth, if I believe all of these things, then it got back to nightmares. What are the nightmares about? And the nightmares had to do with me being a Christian. It had to be with God. And if I really believed that this was just the end of it. And I had to process that. And my grandmom died January the 5th. And Diamond was conceived in January. Not by me, because my daughter's adopted. But Diamond was not supposed to be born until late September or something like that. But she was born in August. And it was so funny because when I got her, it's just certain things remind me of my grandma, which was weird. And it was like he took one away, not took one away, but my grandma left in January, but that's the month that she was conceived, and she came forth the same year. And Diamond literally saved my life.
I remember, like when we first became friends, and I used to be like, "Oh, she's your favorite. She's the one that's for you." Like I used to always say that because I realized that she was your lifesaver. Like even when she was a baby, she was saving your life then, and you didn't even realize that she was saving your life.
Yeah, I had no clue. And it was one point when I was so like frustrated, and I was like deep in my depression. And I didn't want to be a parent anymore. I didn't want to do anything anymore. I wanted to just leave. And I called because I wanted to find out a way that I could get my daughter back. And of course, people, I think I mentioned it to you. My mom, of course, had a fit, but they didn't understand like what if anybody has ever been in water and you feel like you're treading water and you're like right here. And I felt like every time I got my nose above something, just pushed my head under. And that's how suffocating it was. And I could not, I felt like I couldn't keep my head above water. And I felt like I was no good to her or anybody else. And I'm like, I'm not equipped, and I can't do this. And I called, made appointments for the people to come out and everything. And they was like, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to do that. And I was like, I don't care. And I'll never forget, the lady called me back. I was literally driving down Lincoln Drive and I was about to turn on Johnson Street. And she was like, are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm 100% sure. And not too long after that is when I got terminated from my job.
Wow.
Not too long after that. So right when it happened, I had not, and when I left, I took her, we left. I had the opportunity to focus. I had the opportunity to, you know, try to get my head back on straight. But at the time, I didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. So
More often than not, people suffer in silence,
Mhm.
you know, especially with depression and with mental health altogether. And I feel like as people of color and as a woman, right, taking care of the household, you just suffer in silence. What are some of the things that the people that are around, what are some of the signs that they can look for? Like, this person is probably experiencing more than you know.
Wow. If see, it's kind of a two-edged sword because some people knew me and they was like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Some people knew something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on exactly what was wrong. And then some of the signs that I wrote down in the book. It's like the first chapter, like what is depression? But if somebody is different than what you're used to them being, then I would say check in with that person and don't just take fine as a answer. So if someone says, like, are you okay? Yep, I'm fine.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time because I think we just do that. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. Hey, how you doing? I'm good.
Yep.
Right, because if I really say how I'm doing, it's like, hey, I'm gonna give you too much. I didn't need no.
Exactly.
But then people say, how you doing?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's what it was for me. Like when I'm sorry, you had a question?
No, finish, answer that
Okay.
question. But
I did the same thing. And I had the same fear, like, because if I really tell you, like, are you gonna listen? And then it was times when I let out a little bit and it wasn't heard and I stopped. Yeah, I wouldn't say anymore. And it's not like some people was like, oh my God, I wish I would have listened more. And I was like, it's not, you could have blinked wrong and I could have thought that you wasn't. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like, and it was nothing against them, because she's known me probably for like, maybe like almost 8 years. And she was like, I wish I would have, and I was like, you would have never known. You would have not, yeah. And it wasn't,
you don't know. And it's not like, there's not something that you can pinpoint in one person to say they're depressed. Depression is an isolated thing. So you isolate yourself, but you isolate yourself within yourself. So the people on the outside looking in don't know that you're really depressed or you're really isolated until you actually say something. So it's hard to detect that person that's really depressed because they mask it so well. Depression is like a mask thing. Like you can mask it all you want, but only you know what's really going on in the inside. So it's not like I can say, oh my gosh, she's depressed. How do we really know? So it's like really hard to detect if somebody is really depressed. It's something that they have to deal with. And like she was speaking about, like triggers. Most people that are depressed, they don't realize it, but there are things that trigger them to be depressed. Like I go see a therapist, and my therapist tells me, don't go home every day and go to sleep. That's depression. Don't let depression speak louder than you. If you allow depression to speak louder than you, you're going to be depressed. So you have to do things that make you happy, things that are outside of your normal comfort zone. And people will never know that you're technically depressed.
Yeah, that goes into a lot. We think about habits, like behavior wise. But let's go to a question to the audience real quick. You've been waiting for a while.
My question is it safe to say to some degree that we all suffer from depression at some point through our lives? Is it like maybe the extent of how long we suffer in that depression that makes us, I guess, get diagnosed with depression?
If it's more than, some people, I think they say if it's more than 2 weeks that you've been experiencing it. But some people go through situational depression. Like if you lose a loved one, and that loved one, and grieving. So one of the longest chapters in here deals with grief, because that was one of the things I the grief had me. It really had me. And a lot of times when you aren't aware of what you're going through,
Right.
and you just kind of just keep going, and you just keep going. I had kids I was taking care of. So I had to go. I had to go to work. I had to do this. I had to provide. I had to do all of those things. So it wasn't like I had a chance to grieve.
Right.
So even with the situation of depression, it's good to get help. So if you know somebody who lost a loved one, or someone who lost a job, or someone who is experiencing something that's different and that's out of the norm, and you see something, then that's somebody, that's one of the times when you can follow up on and just be like, just check in again. And you can say, are you okay? And if they say yes, and like, no, I really need, are you okay?
Right,
Yeah.
right. All right, so we're gonna take a break. We'll be right back with Sador's Turning Pages.
We all looking at him like.
You still on camera, right?
Yeah, they just steady talking, don't even know we still on. Look.